All right, so for designing programs for a group, we want to zoom in a little bit more onto some specific sessions and talk not just about the bigger picture of what people need to work on, not just the idea of creating templates, but in this case, actually designing a specific day of strength work for a group, right? And especially with strength work, this can be a little bit messy and tricky because you have a lot of people potentially coming to a class within one class, then also the entire population of gym members coming in throughout the day who have a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different experience levels, a lot of different training goals. And we're like, all right, great. Everybody today is going to back squat. And how can we create this back squatting session in a way that it's actually helpful and valuable for at least the vast majority of the people who are coming in? And this is a little bit tricky to do. This isn't necessarily something that's just like, hey, here's how you do it. Everybody needs to get stronger. Boom, boom, boom. Pull some program from T Nation. We're good to go, right? It requires a little bit more thought to understand exactly why we're prescribing different stuff, and then set it up in a way like we've been talking about throughout the series, where members have some understanding of what the point is of what they're doing in a way that creates buy-in from them and helps them have intention in their training session, and also sets coaches up for success in terms of being able to explain to members why they're doing what they're doing, and then also just manage the logistics, right? Like, say you have a class with 30 people in it, some with a ton of experience, some with no experience at all. Maybe the front desk person is out today, so there's also someone coming in and trying to ask about joining the gym. Someone's coming in to drop in, they showed up early and they want to buy 17 t-shirts, and you're like, man, there's a lot going on right now. So how can you set up the session in a way that, given those constraints, the coach can still get folks to actually have a really solid training experience? So, that's a lot to think about and to manage. But if there's a few, let's say, like, key points and takeaways for designing these kinds of strength sessions, I think we can actually get a lot of people making good progress and having good experience with their strength work in their group program. So, John, I know that you were thinking about some stuff regarding the different things that people are hoping to get out of a strength session, and the different kinds of things that we can try to program for them, such that we are giving something to all these different levels of experience. What are you thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you brought up, that logistics can be tough for some people, but the idea of having different levels of ability in the same class can make it tough for strength. You take someone who has 5, 6, 7 years of strength training experience, they're going to react and progress very differently to someone who is in month 2 of training. And I think having a program that is either has, different options within it, or is easily adaptable to different people, can be important. So for example, yesterday in my gym, we had an 8-minute EMOM of 1 power snatch. And the goal was 85 to 95% of your max, and staying within that kind of frame, not avoiding people going for PRs, avoiding people missing reps, but just getting some reps out in that percentage range. For our, what we call our health track, which is the lower level version, essentially, we had people doing hang power snatches. So we take out the element of pulling from the ground, allow them to focus on the technique of it. For some people, if it's their first, maybe it's their first month at the gym, and they don't know what their max is, they don't have a number to pull percentages from, I might have them do 3 reps on the minute. And in that situation, they're going to be able to get some reps done, hit multiple reps, get technique work done, without worrying about the loading. And it's still going to allow the people who have that experience and want to work at that higher end percentage, that's not going to affect them, but we're still going to be able to get some meaningful work done. So I think having a program that is adaptable to different levels is important, especially in, a CrossFit setting or in a group class setting where you have multiple levels, people of different abilities and levels.
So, I mean, we might as well dive right into a controversial topic. I mean, how much do regular gym goers who are just like, yeah, I found this place online, my friend recommended it, I'm trying to get back into shape, how much do these people even need to be snatching?
For those people, they don't need to be snatching. Again, our health track, which is definitely our kind of aimed at people who haven't done a lot of working out in the past, has minimal Olympic lifting. It has minimal gymnastic skills or lower level gymnastic skills. We don't have everyone in our gym doing handstands. We'll sometimes have them doing deficit push-ups or piked push-ups or a dumbbell Z press whenever there's handstand work. But we rarely have handstands in that track. We will usually once a week do Olympic lifting for them with a barbell in a controlled setting. So yesterday's Metcon had light power snatches in. They were doing dumbbell snatches. There's just people that don't need to do that. They don't need to be, doing heavy Olympic lifting. Then they have nothing really to gain from it. And I don't think it's necessary for those people to be trying to do it. They could hurt themselves quite easily. Someone who's never done strength training before trying to do a squat snatch is not really advisable. And what benefit are they getting out of it that they couldn't from doing a front squat or from doing a dumbbell snatch? You can get the same kind of stimulus out of it. So,
yeah, I actually think that's a more important, like a more helpful way to frame it. Because I would say that the idea that people doing Olympic lifting are just going to hurt themselves left and right, that doesn't seem to be borne out in any of the actual analyses that I've seen, where it's like, yes, people get hurt doing Olympic lifting, but it doesn't seem to be at a rate that's any worse or better than any other type of movement. It's like people get hurt deadlifting, people get hurt running. If you're doing some sort of physical activity, there's whatever percentage risk of injury. And so for me, the idea that like, these deconditioned individuals trying to do dynamic contractions with a barbell are just going to like fuck themselves up left and right doesn't seem to be borne out anecdotally, right? It's like in the gym, what do we see people getting hurt doing? Like it's a lot of just overuse injuries, like knee stuff, elbow tendonitis, whatever. You don't see people just like, I tried to do a clean and like, I don't know. You do see the occasional, I knocked my elbow on my knee and hurt my wrist, but that's usually someone who's a very serious competitive athlete who's trying to hit something heavy under fatigue and they don't have great front rack mobility. And it's like, yeah, well, guess what, sir? You signed up to do this as a sport. And like, sometimes that shit happens.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's my take on it.
I'd agree to an extent. I think it's just also playing in that risk factor as well.
Yeah.
Is someone more likely to hurt themselves on a barbell snatch than a dumbbell snatch when they don't know what they're doing that well? And, is it a much greater risk? Probably not. But is it slightly greater risk when, again, we're looking at a stimulus of what they're doing? Right. And if someone's snatching, what stimulus are we trying to create for them? And under fatigue, is a dumbbell snatch going to give them the same stimulus as a barbell snatch? Yeah. Are they going to be able to maintain better technique, even regardless of risk of injury? Can they maintain better technique with a dumbbell? Yeah. So.
Well, and I think that's the way that I look at it is like, what's the cost benefit for you of going through the process of learning the technique of this movement and prioritizing that enough that it becomes something that you can actually get something out of, right? Like if you're just here to work out, do you need to spend the literal years it will take for you to develop the mobility and stability and technique to get something out of doing a heavy barbell snatch? Like, not really. For you, you're just trying to get a certain amount of tension, in different contractions. You're trying to develop motor control in different kinds of positions. And a lot of the time we don't necessarily need to be doing a squat snatch or whatever to get that. It's like, hey, guess what? Maybe we do want to do some sort of hinging stuff. Like we can certainly do RDLs. Maybe we want to add a little bit of speed to that kind of contraction. Like you can just do a snatch pull. We want to do some sort of overhead stability kind of stuff, like dumbbell snatch, overhead carries, some form of Turkish get up, whatever. Like that stuff is all lower barrier to entry and doesn't require the investment in time and skill work to create the contraction that's going to be helpful that something like a barbell snatch does. But that said, a lot of folks do come into gyms like ours with the intention of doing CrossFit like stuff as a recreational sport. So we need to balance that as well, right? Because some of these folks, they're coming to us the same way that they'd be like, I signed up for this volleyball league on Thursday nights, And you're telling me like, oh, well, based upon your goals and your background, we don't know if it's actually advisable for you to be jumping and landing until you develop this amount of motor control so that your knee is not doing this thing that we've determined is not correct. So we're actually not going to let you play volleyball. We're going to actually have you do this other thing instead. And you're like, fuck are you talking about? Like I'm trying to play volleyball with my coworkers, right? And so like we do have to balance that where it's like, let's put you in a position if you do want to recreationally play CrossFit, that you have the skill set that enables you to do that.
Yeah. And I think ultimately that's that foundation of the strength program within the training, setting people up so that they have the joint mechanics and like understanding of the movement. They have that basic strength and stability through the knee, through the hip, through the ankle, so that they can do these things. And that's for some people, that's why the strength part of the program is important, because it's making them more resilient to other things within the program and outside. But, if someone has a good squat position and they have good strength in their squat position, then them doing a rebounding box jump or even just a regular box jump is going to be a better movement, a more stable movement, and with better mechanics.
Yeah. No, I again, there's a lot of gray area here, and there's not a perfect answer, but I think those are a lot of the kinds of things that ideally we're thinking about when designing these group programs. But yeah, I mean, to circle back to some specific sessions and to kind of zoom in on some of the stuff that we were talking about, right? It's like, okay, we have people with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different skill levels, a lot of different goals, balancing between getting back into shape, staving off aging, actually becoming somewhat competitive, maybe getting seriously competitive. And so we want to design these strength sessions in a way that facilitates people having an experience that is positive for them and enables people at all those different stages to move forward, right? And so, I mean, you mentioned the sort of like EMOM snatch type of situation, which is going to be good for exposing people to the movement, good for some folks who have some experience at training this kind of like repeated, Olympic lifting type of stuff that shows up frequently in sport. Good for some more advanced technique work at like a heavy-ish weight. Like that's all great stuff. But sort of like we've been saying, I think that for a lot of people, the primary focus of strength work for them is not going to be on this sort of like explosive skill-based dynamic contractions of Olympic lifting. It's going to be on like, okay, we need to get you moving through squatting, lunging, hinging, pressing, vertical pulling, horizontal pulling, right? All these sort of basic patterns with a decent amount of tension that enables you to build strength over time, right? Improve that motor pattern. And especially if you're a beginner, like just actually get used to doing this kind of stuff and taking your joints through those ranges of motion, right? So, I mean, a thing that we've been doing recently, which has worked pretty well for a large group, is every 3 minutes for 5 sets, do 5 back squats. If you're, more experienced and you want to build throughout, awesome. Shoot for something heavy on your last set. If you're new to this and you just want to do 5 reps and keep it at the same weight and try to increase that week to week, awesome. Let's do that. If this is something that is very new for you and you just need to get more repetitions in on the movement and it's kind of a little bit squirrely, you're not even lifting that much weight relative to what you can do, why don't you go ahead and actually start with 8 to 10 reps? And then if it feels okay and you want to go a little bit heavier, you can. Right. And that puts a bunch of people in a position where they can actually get something that's appropriate for them out of this squatting scenario, and also puts the coach in a position where the class is sort of organized on the clock. They can sort of, self-organize around watching that timer tick down. And it's like, okay, time to go again. What am I going to do on this set? And it seems to work out okay. So I don't know if you've seen success with anything like that, but that for us, that tends to go well for strength days.
Yeah. So how do you kind of balance the progression over a cycle? So, we've talked about before how an ideal cycle for strength-based training would be, obviously individualized because it's suited to what a person has to work on what their abilities are, their ability to recover, all of this. When we look at it in a group setting, you can't adapt to the individual. You can't adapt to the needs, to the strengths, to the weaknesses. So what are your thoughts around how we balance out the ideal progressions within a cycle when you have this potentially an avatar, I think we've talked about before having that avatar for programming of, someone you think about in class about who you're programming this around, in terms of ability. But how do you balance that from a programming standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing with a lot of stuff for programming for groups is that the idea of progression that you may be focused on for an individual needs to be adapted to the idea that this avatar that you're programming for is not necessarily going to show up all the time, isn't necessarily going to execute the session properly, and doesn't necessarily care that much about a specific progression towards a goal, right? They just want to come in and have a good workout. So that's definitely something that we have adapted to over time and done less like this week is this week is this next week is this. It's more about creating a scenario in which someone can have, like we just talked about, 25 great back squat contractions in somewhere around 20 minutes, and maybe do that again the following week and maybe shoot for 20 contractions at a higher weight, and and maybe even just vary the structure. Okay, we did every 3 minutes last week. You guys are going to bitch about, oh, everything's always every 3 minutes. Why is it always every 3 minutes? Why do we do this? Okay, well, cool. We're going to do 20 contractions in a slightly different format this following week so that you feel some level of novelty and excitement surrounding it, but there is maybe a larger progression. So I don't know if that's helpful or if that's kind of what you're asking, but I guess that's the way I would think about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you touched on a point there in terms of, doing that on a 3-minute clock and people getting bored of it or frustrated with it. And I think that's one of the tougher parts of programming for a group is keeping their attention and interest while maintaining as close to best practices as possible. There's a ton of research on strength training and development. And, the kinds of rests you need, the kind of rep ranges you need to be hitting, and the kind of percentages you need to be hitting for those rep ranges to make progress. And like with most things in training, progression is pretty boring and mundane. If you really want to maximize your improvement, it's fairly boring training because we're making these small tweaks week by week. We're making these progressions, but we're not, it's not drastically different. It's not necessarily fun or exciting, but it's what makes the best progress. And I think that's always the hard part when it comes to groups. People don't want to do the same thing all the time. They want the variety. They want something to keep them interested, and that's not necessarily the most effective way to build strength. So talking about kind of most effective ways, obviously for the majority of group classes in a CrossFit or similar gym, they will be doing one strength piece in a session, right? Potentially maybe getting one accessory piece in there, but usually it's just going to be one strength piece. Again, if we're looking at ideal strength programs, we know that's not necessarily the quickest way to make the most improvement. Not to say it can't be effective, but if you had 6 weeks to get your back squat as high as possible, we would not be doing just back squats once a week. There'd be assistance pieces in there. There'd be some hypertrophy work, some top end strength development in other areas, a lunge, a step up, adding in these other pieces. So how do we maximize that singular strength piece within a class? How do we make it the most efficient it can be?
How do you, John?
No, I'm asking
you. Tell
you.
me.
I need to know.
You tell me. You tell me. I want to know.
I was hoping you knew. So I mean, one thing that you actually can do is throwing in some assistance work into the conditioning piece. So let's take a back squat. Maybe the workout after you do your strength piece is going to include some loaded walking lunges, which could quite easily, if it was separated out, could be an assistance piece for developing that back squat strength. So sometimes you might, as an athlete in a class, you might question, hey, we just did like 30 back squats for our strength piece, and now you have us doing 100 wall balls in a workout. Like, that's stupid. So no, there's a reason for that. That's like that is your assistance work for your back squats, and that's going to help your back squat improve. So quite often we use that technique when we're looking at trying to develop strength without adding in additional individual strength pieces.
Yeah, I think that that's really valuable insight. You know, if maybe if we think about programming for a specific individual, right? Imagine someone who is reasonably fit, somewhat experienced, not competitive, wants to get stronger. And you're like, okay, what would your session be if you're going to be in the gym for about an hour? And we're programming specifically for you. You know how to do all the movements. You know, we don't have a ton of like time constraints or logistics stuff other than just you have about 60 minutes of exercise you can do. You might give that person 4 sets of 5 back squat building. You know, B1, B2 is some sort of rear foot elevated split squat, and then maybe like a banded hip extension drill or something like that. And then part C is heavy sled pushes for 50 feet with a decent amount of rest, right? Like that would be a reasonable session to give someone like that. And they would probably have a good experience with it. That's the kind of thing that would make them stronger, right? But that type of session is not going to go well in a class for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe they could do the back squat, but you're going to have a hard time doing 3 parts in a class because then you run into logistics issues. You have to pull back from the coaching of like movement and teaching people what to do in a way that's not necessarily helpful. And it's sort of like we talked about in some of the other episodes on affiliate programming, you give people too much like B1, B2 stuff. They start to get antsy and they start to not like it. And then something like a sled push, depending on the sizes of your group and the way your facility is laid out, it's like, I can tell you what, that's not happening at 5:30 p.m. in downtown Chicago, right? We don't have enough sleds. We don't have enough space. It would just be a catastrophe. So, you know, to your point, you can often try to structure stuff in a way where you're recreating the feel of that session without necessarily making it look exactly the same. So maybe we do something like that every 3 minutes, 5 back squats, and then part B, maybe something that kind of looks like conditioning, but is actually accessory work, right? We say, okay, you know what you're going to do? You're going to do 21, 15, 9 rear foot elevated split squats on the right foot, on the left foot, suitcase deadlift on the right hand, suitcase deadlift on the left hand, and assault bike calories. And then the goal here is not necessarily for time, but for consistent quality of movement throughout, and choose a weight that allows you to keep your sets unbroken but tough, right? And that's like sort of conditioning, but sort of accessory work. And it's going to fit within the time frame of a class. And the coach is going to have a little bit of time to review the back squat with everybody, a little bit of time to review the rear foot elevated split squat with everybody. And people are going to come out of that session feeling like they did some strength work, they did some conditioning, and they may realize it or not, but they actually did a lot of volume of both squatting and single leg work in terms of their contractions that hopefully set them up for improvement, you know, across the board.
Yeah. So then how do you look at progressions over a cycle for a class? So often you'll find people, they miss days, or they miss a week of training because they're away. And then they have to jump back in and they're essentially 2 weeks behind, as it were, on their training. Do you think we should be looking at programming with that in mind? Or do we just program on the assumption that everyone's going to be there every day of that cycle?
Yeah, and I think that some of that depends on the size of your community and where you're at with like your self-coaching, et cetera, right? For us, with a relatively large gym, with a lot of different coaches, we definitely program with the assumption that people are going to miss a ton of days and not know what's going on. And maybe in a class where they don't know or trust the coach, and like that we have to sort of mitigate a lot of the potential emotional aspects of that. So we've moved away from making things very specific progressions because we've seen that create too many logistical problems. That said, I do know plenty of gyms where it's like, okay, you're the owner operator, you're coaching 80% of the classes, you have a smaller community, people are very bought in to your specific plan and your specific program, and they come because they want that type of progression. And in that case, I think that it can be fine, but there's probably a scaling point where it just like sort of doesn't work anymore. And the exact number of people that is potentially changes depending on the community, but that's something to kind of consider. Like, where are you on that spectrum, and what are the potential challenges going to look like for your coaches provided you're not the one coaching most of the classes, right? So for us, sort of like I was saying before, we think about progression in a few different ways. You can think about, are you progressing the volume of contractions in a specific movement pattern, right? So maybe we do something like we were talking about where we're doing like a heavier back squat. Maybe we're actually increasing the number of reps per interval there. You could think about increasing the weight rather than the number of reps. You could think about decreasing the rest to make it a little bit more fatigue based. You could think about doing some combination of your strength work and that sort of like pseudo accessory conditioning work and making the conditioning work like higher intensity or more contractions or something like that. So, we try to progress things by thinking about the sort of like zoomed out structure of what's actually happening on that day, but avoid making it look too cleanly like, again, like I was saying before, this is a program we pulled from T Nation, 60% this week, 65% this next week, 70% the following week, right? Because we've seen that just create too much confusion and issues for our coaches and for our members.
Yeah, on that, one thing that I really push for with our strength work is ranges with percentage work.
Yeah, for sure.
And part of that is to allow for how people feel day to day. So even with individuals, I'll sometimes give them a range, depending on what the work is. But, giving that window of completing all your sets 70 to 75% or 70 to 80%, it allows those people that are feeling good to push on a little bit more, or those who are feeling tired or sore or it's just not clicking for them today to be on the lighter end. And I think, yeah, sure. If I said, okay, we're doing all these squats at 75% today, and people need to adapt and go down from there, they can. But then from the mental aspect of, they feel like they won't have got as much out of the session, right? If they think, oh, I had to scale down to 70% for those squats, like
that's a good point.
That can have a negative
people
effect.
don't like not being able to
Right.
do what they're supposed to. Yeah.
But if I was to frame it as, okay, it's 70 to 80%, I want your first working set at least at 70. If it feels good, you can build. If you want to stay at 70 all the way through, you can. And it gives them that opportunity without scaling, without taking the easy way out, to still get some meaningful work done.
Yeah. Well, and like we've talked about on some of the other episodes as well, right? I mean, if you have a gym with potentially hundreds of people who are part of your community coming into classes, there's massive variation in terms of how people experience relative percentages as well, right? You have someone, you go back to our muscle fiber type episode from whenever that was, a few months ago, and if you have someone with a lot of a certain type of muscle fiber and you have someone else with a different type of muscle fiber that's predominant in their squatting muscles, those people are going to have vastly different experiences at trying to do high repetition sets at 80%. For some folks, that's a walk in the park. And for other folks, it's like, yo, you're going to need an ambulance, like get the stretcher, because this person is going to need to be rolled out of here if you have them do too many sets of whatever 8 at 80%, and so that's something that you need to account for in the group programming. And I think the idea of giving people a percentage range, giving people a rep range, that can help them find the spot that's the appropriate stimulus for them. And then also, like you said, we see that as well, where there's some percentage of people that they're gonna do what's written on the board no matter what. Doesn't matter if it makes any sense for them. Doesn't matter if they slept last night or not. Doesn't matter, like that. They have a mission and it's whatever is written on the board. And you're like, I admire your dedication to this cause, but do you know that we just made this up? Like this isn't a thing. Like we made this up. It's fake. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. And I think ultimately it's for 90% of the population, just doing some work is going to be an improvement, is going to get them moving in the right direction. So, as much as there are best practices and optimizations within a program, for a lot of people in a group class setting, they could do a 5x5 back squat anywhere between 50 and 90%, and they're going to get some benefit from it. They could do the same thing every week for 8 weeks, and they're going to get a benefit from it without worrying about progressions and all this kind of thing. So for majority of the population, it doesn't need to be perfect. They just need to turn up and get some work done.
Yeah, if you can show up consistently and get some good contractions in, like you said, for most of the people coming to a group class, that is sufficient for progress.
Right.
Doesn't have to be anything other than that. And a lot of what we're talking about with programming is like psychological gamesmanship to get people to show up consistently and get some good contractions in.
Yeah, I would bet for someone who is under 2 years of training, if you made them do 5x5 back squat every week for 8 weeks and test at beginning and end, their max would go up.
Oh, huge amount.
Just doing the same weight every week.
Yeah.
For 8 weeks, their max would go up without any kind of progressions or developments. So
I completely agree with that. Just literally practicing the movement.
Yeah.
Like just do this movement again. You can get used to it. You can get better at it. You can understand what it feels like more. Yeah, do it again. Yeah, no, again, like this week too. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, for sure.
But no one wants
would people do would people do that though? Yeah, right.
No.
Cool. Well, next time we'll talk about some conditioning sessions, designing that a little bit more specifically. Similar idea to what we've done today, kind of dive into some sessions and some of the logistics surrounding it and all that. But hopefully this is helpful for actually writing strength programming for a group and some of the ways to, like we've been saying, trick folks into doing what we think is best for them. And like the paternalistic, manipulative coaches that we are.
Yeah.